today, we've got Andrew Constable. Andrew is based in the UK, is a well-known OKR consultant working with a range of organizations that are looking to boost their growth and execution capability. He's a founder member of the OKR network, which some of you might have heard about. And he is also founder of Visualise Solutions, which is his company in the UK, through which he does his consulting. So it's great to have you with us, Andrew. We do quite a lot of work with consultants because it's the software and the consulting tend to go together. And then I have a colleague, Gaurav Sabharwal, who is the CEO and co-founder of JOP as well. And later on, after Andrew's presentation, he'll be telling us a little bit more about how JOP supports best practice when it comes to OKR implementation. Just looking at the topic, what's all the fuss about with objectives and key results? Good question. I'm sure that many of you have heard about OKRs. Some of you might have implemented them. Certainly for those particularly tech companies, but I think, the concept has definitely expanded into other sectors, across other sectors now. Those people that really take execution seriously and realize that strategy is much more than just a PowerPoint deck that's been really well put together and then communicated. For those people that know what it takes and the kind of commitment, process, leadership that are required to really execute on aspirational goals, that's really what the fuss is all about. OKRs is pretty much a proven concept, but many people need advice. That's why the likes of Andrew exist, because a lot of the concepts seem to make sense. They're quite easy to understand. But when you actually come to implementing it in real life, that's where you realize that there's sometimes a little bit of magic required. So I think that's the introduction from me. Andrew, let's hand over to you. Looking forward to hearing what you have to say. And it's great to be spending time with you.
Fantastic. So I'm just going to drop this down. Okay, is my screen still showing? I assume it is.
Yes, I got that.
Fantastic. So as Grant said, what's the fuss about objectives and key results, or OKRs? It's a term which you might hear quite often, especially if you're in the startup world and other areas like that. You will hear it. You will hear that certain companies are using OKRs, but really, what actually are they? I think that's the first fundamental thing we need to talk about when we go through this. Okay. So, as we said, I'm the founder of a business called Visualise Solutions. We are a business which deals with various areas. One of those is OKRs and strategic planning. So we look at how organizations can not only implement or come up with strategies, but can then actually implement those and actually have some mechanism in place which allows them to focus on delivering that strategy. And I think that's a big issue where a lot of organizations will literally just have a strategy and then forget about how to execute, or sometimes they go the way around. They don't have a strategy and they just execute. So I think OKRs fits in nicely. So that's where I kind of sit and I kind of work. Check out the website visualisesolutions.co.uk, which is at the bottom left-hand side. And there's plenty of information in there about us and about what we do. So first things first, we're going to try and keep this fairly interactive as much as we can on a webinar. And what we're going to be doing is I'm going to be taking you through some of the basics of OKRs, some of the mechanics of OKRs, where they kind of fit. And then I'll be taking you into a case study, and then I'm going to hand over to the rest of the guys who are going to then just talk about some of the OKR software and how it kind of works. But first things first, there's a QR code on the screen now. There's two actually on there, but the one at the bottom, the larger one, it says scan to join. If everyone can just take out their smartphone and just scan that QR code, it will take you to a web page, and there'll be some questions we're just going to ask you as we go through this. So I'll leave that on the screen just for a few more seconds, just to make sure everyone's actually on. and hopefully we can actually then get people to join as we go forward. I'll give it one more. I'll give it 10 more seconds to make sure everyone's joining, and then we'll go forward. Okay. So, like I said, we're going to try and keep this fairly interactive. I just want you guys to start thinking about this. Okay, fantastic. So a few people have already started doing this. So just really put, what type of organization are you? You know, are you a startup? Are you a corporate, an SME? Or is there anything else you currently work in? And just we'll just leave that a few more seconds just to get people to start entering that, to see exactly where you sit. Okay, so we've got 7 startups. Okay, we've got 4 corporates, 2 SMEs, 3 others. Not got any non-profits on yet, as far as I'm aware. But okay, so getting the startups on there. Fantastic. Okay. Okay, so the second question, just going to load that up now, is, are you currently using OKRs? Okay, it's got 1, 2, okay. Okay. Vast majority of people are so far. Get 7 people who aren't. 5, okay. Getting closer. There's a mixture here. Okay. Good. So I've got a few people. It's kind of a mix then, which is useful. Okay, so first question I want for you guys, really, again, we're going to use the interactive format, is what actually are OKRs? So it's going to load again, and this is kind of a word cloud. So what I want you guys to do is just to go into it and just type in the 4 spaces you've got, what are actually OKRs? What do you say? What words would you use to describe OKRs? And just start entering those in as you go through this, and it will populate a word cloud on the screen. Okay, goal management, it's good. Projections, okay. Okay, objective, alignment, results. Okay, end results. Okay, mission. Fantastic, milestones. Aligned team, that's good. Agile, yeah, agile is definitely important. Collaboration, good. Just we'll give it a few more seconds again when more people are actually just entering some more words in for us. Measurable, strategy execution, management, vision, okay, time bound, okay. These are all good. These are all good words. Okay, so we've got more and more being developed on there. As you can see, probably on the screen at the minute, the main words which are being used are objectives and results, which you would kind of expect. Goal management is another one which is being used quite a lot by the participants at the minute. Key, obviously key results, quite important. And there's other areas. Alignment is quite a common term I can see across people on the call. So that's all good. So like I said, I just wanted to see what you guys, if you guys are using OKRs first of all, but also then how are you describing OKRs? You know, what actually are they? So with that, we're just going to get into what the definition of how I see OKRs, and I know some of the other guys see the exactly the same. So first things first, OKRs are a strategy and alignment framework. Okay, so they're not just a goal setting framework. They're very much around strategy and alignment. Okay, so what we're trying to do here, we're trying to create an area of organizational clarity by connecting the top of the organization and the goals that they're trying to hit with lower levels of the organization. And what that does, that builds that shared commitment up across the business. People understand where the business is going, how it's going to get there, and how it links into the overall strategy of the organization. So for me, that's the definition I tend to use. OKRs, a strategy and alignment framework. Really important that we understand that. You've got to be able to link the top of the organization to lower levels. Otherwise, people are pulling in different directions. So for me, okay, that is exactly how I see this strategy and alignment framework. So there's a good quote here from the founder or co-founder of a company called Go Noodle, which OKRs are the magical machine. Insert strategy in one end and get focused execution at the other. Okay, so for me, that kind of sums it up. Okay, they sometimes can be seen as a black box, and they're not. But the things we think about, you need strategy one end and you have execution at the other. Quite a key part here. If you haven't got strategy at one end, you're not going to probably succeed in OKRs. You need to have that sort of strategy in place to then deliver on what you're trying to achieve using OKRs. So again, there are basically insert strategy one end, get focus execution at the other. So just a quick history lesson really on OKRs and exactly, where they've come from. So a lot of people think that OKRs are fairly new. You hear this quite a lot, there's a new terminology, some new terms out there. It's a new management tool. It's this and the other. But it's not new at all. I mean, it started in the 1970s with a guy called Andy Grove, who was the Intel CEO. He took the concept from management by objectives by a guy called Peter Drucker, and he just changed it slightly to become OKRs. 1974, a guy called John Doerr joined the company, and he learned OKRs. John Doerr became an investor. And basically one of the things he did, one of his companies he invested in was in 1999 was Google. And when he was sitting down with Google and they were talking about where they want to go as an organization, you've got to remember 1999, Google were very young. John Doerr introduced the concept of OKRs to Google, and Google really adopted it, really enjoyed it, and found it really focused themselves in their business. And then from then, Google's really using OKRs as almost like an operating system for their business now. You can go onto the website, onto the Google OKR website. It's got loads of resources on there. It's got loads of information. It talks about how they do this in their organization. And it's become now presently used by lots of small startups, SMEs, small to medium enterprises, and large enterprise customers. So it can be used across different areas, but when you hear about it's brand new, it's not. It's been around for a long time. And as Grant said at the start, it's a tried and tested method to actually have focus in your business or any product you're developing as you move forward. So again, companies that are using OKR, some of the large companies, I've mentioned Google, LinkedIn, Intel, Twitter, Uber, these companies have all been using OKRs over a certain time period. Amazon uses them a lot, not just in their data side of their business, but also in their warehousing business, in their retail business. They use them across their whole organization. So again, these are big companies, but just remember that small companies do use them as well. And it can be used by a small startup or a large organization. Okay, so why are OKRs important? So this is a study which was done by MIT in the USA in 2018. And they basically interviewed top managers of organizations, senior execs, middle management, and frontline employees. And they they asked them, can anyone define the strategy of the businesses they work in? And what they found is that, quite surprisingly, at the top of the organization, i.e. the top team or the C-suite, 51% could name those priorities, but 49% said, no, we can't actually name those priorities, which to me was quite a big surprise when I first read this. Okay, I see this a lot that's disjointed, but I don't see it to that extent sometimes. But then it really changes. Then senior execs, one level below potentially the C-suite, only 22% could actually name the strategic priorities. 78% said, I can't name those. And as you can see, as he goes down further, middle management is even worse. 82% can't name those priorities. And then frontline is 87% can't name those priorities. So what you're having here, you're having a problem where you've got a disconnect between what the top of the organization is saying and what the frontline employees are actually thinking and doing. And where OKRs can really be helpful is it can allow the top team to transmit and communicate the message of what's important for the organization across these different levels. And it allows these individual levels to then start working on focus on goals, objectives, which are really going to help them achieve the objective above them, and that above that, and above that, and above that. And that just allows that alignment piece to take place in the organization. So that's the kind of framing, how we want to frame this, is that's why I said it's a strategy and alignment tool. You have to be able to have a strategy in place, and you also need to have an alignment to actually communicate that message. Okay, so I saw on the word cloud, what are OKRs? And there was some keywords on there. There was lots of good keywords: objectives, key results, goals, link, strategy, execution, things like that. Kind of need to have a mission in place so you can have a purpose to then build around your strategy as you go forward. So what is strategy? First question. So strategy is really, for me, there's plenty of definitions out there, and lots of different people will have different definitions. For me, it's a set of choices, so think about your strategy of where are you going to play in the market. So when we say that, we say, okay, is it what geographics you're going to play in, what sectors you're going to play in, what industries, all these different areas. And then think about how are you going to win? Okay, so within those areas you've identified, how are you actually going to go out there and win against the competition? And that also links into things like capabilities. You need the right capabilities in place. You need the right systems in place. And that is really what I class as strategy. There's lots of other definitions, like I said, but that's more the practitioner's view of strategy. But below that is the objectives. So you have your strategy in place, you know where the business wants to go, but then how do you actually achieve that? And that's where objectives and key results can actually come into this. if you use them already, like some of you are, you will know these basic mechanics. But as an overview, really, objectives are goals that inspire and set direction. Okay, so think of the where are you going to focus? That is really what an objective is. A key result is the how. Okay, so how do you know you're going to achieve your objective? So that tends to be much more focused around numbers and things like that. So you're looking maybe at growth rates, or you're looking at reducing certain time scales, or it could be anything like that. So that's really where the two are different. Objective is the where you're going to focus, and key results are the how. How do you know you're going to achieve your objective? But then below that, we also have initiatives or tasks, another word for that. And tasks are really areas which allow you to progress towards those key results. So we always think about, for example, if you have a key result of trying to onboard a new team in your organization, some of the tasks behind that could be things like advertising the role, scheduling people for interviews. It could be writing job descriptions. They're really tasks. Okay. The result is to onboard the team within a certain time frame and to a certain standard. Okay. So that becomes a key result. So these are kind of the mechanics of how we look at OKRs when we're developing the system. So just as an example, OKR, and there's plenty of examples out there to look at, but this is the structure that I tend to follow. And this comes from a guy called Ben Lamont, who's probably the #1 thought leader in OKRs. And he really came up with this idea. And basically, we structure it as such. We have the mission at the top. So I mentioned earlier the purpose of the organization, but you can also do this for teams as well. What is the purpose? What is the mission of the team, i.e. marketing team, as an example? Their mission is to deliver tools to support the sales team, drive brand awareness and trust. Okay. Now, when I work with teams, I always ask that question: what is your mission? Why do you actually come to work? What do you actually do? And it's one of those conversations which really helps the team start thinking quite broad, because a lot of the time they've never actually been asked this question. So for me, I think that's quite important. Let's just get that down. Let's understand the mission of why do you come to work. Then we have the objective. Okay, so we have a 22 objective. This could be, for example, increase the quality of leads cost effectively. It's a basic objective, potentially not the greatest terminology, but it's not too bad. At least it says on paper what it is. But an area which a lot of teams forget about when they're setting OKRs is they forget about the blue box, the why now. So what you have to think about is the why now. You have to put in basic language. Why are you suggesting that we need to focus on this objective going forward? Why is it important to the business as you go forward? This allows you to become a lot more transparent in the organization. People then understand what you're trying to achieve across the business. And also, if people do leave the business, they have a pretty clear view of why this was suggested in the first place. So really important. Again, that really allows critical thinking. And then the bottom part of that, you have key results. Okay, so key results are normally quantifiable. So normally have numbers in those. Don't always have to have numbers, but generally that's how we would structure it as we see on the screen. So for example, the first one would be reduce the overall cost per lead from £105 in UK pounds to in quarter 4 to £75 of this result. So this is how we kind of set it up, and this is how we've done this. Okay, so reduce the overall cost of lead from 105 to 75. And then we kind of look at it like, so we kind of write these results as we go forward. But one thing we have to make sure is they're very clear to understand. They're not full of terminology, and it allows us then to be very precise on how we actually do this. Okay, so an OKR cycle. So that is basically the time frame that you look at generating OKRs. Now, you can do annual OKRs. You can do quarterly OKRs. I have worked with teams who've done monthly OKRs, although I personally wouldn't recommend it. But normally we suggest that a OKR cycle is normally on a quarter basis. Okay. And the process we normally follow when we start thinking about actually defining the OKRs is this. So the first part is set on the left-hand side. So that's when we're going to kind of set our OKRs. We're going to write our OKRs and we're going to do all the communication and everything we need to do. Then we start the period, start the quarter. Then you can also have a mid-quarter check-in. So that is middle of the quarter. How are we progressing? How are we doing with our OKRs? Have we got any problems, any blockers or anything like that? And then towards the end of the quarter, you have a reflect session. And that's where you kind of learn what's gone well, what hasn't gone well, what do we want to do in the next quarter. That part, the reflect area, is really important. A lot of organizations forget that. Once you've done the learning, you then go into the quarter finishes, you then go into reset, and you move forward with the next quarter. And that's kind of the basic cycle. Within this, though, you do also have reviews. It's very quick reviews, and you tend to do that bi-weekly, monthly if you need to. And really, that's just where you check in with the teams. But this is the overall cycle of how we would do this. Okay, so some of the benefits of OKRs are how I see them and how we all see them, really. The first thing first is on the left-hand side, focus on what matters. Okay, you might have hundreds and hundreds of things to do in your business, but there only be certain things which are actually going to be really important for the overall business as it moves forward. A lot of the things are just tasks, as we said earlier. They're not going to be objectives, what need to be achieved, and they're not going to be key results. So think about outcomes that you're actually trying to achieve within the business or the team, department, whatever you work in. Don't just think of outputs. Okay, so if you have an output, that generally means to me that that isn't the right way of framing it. So we want to think about what is the actual outcome you are trying to achieve. It also focuses collaboration as well. So again, everyone can understand where we want to focus and everyone can start pulling that direction. Second benefit is it moves the needle. Okay, so it basically allows the business to potentially grow because they're focusing on those critical growth goals as we go forward. It also allows us to review progress as well, which again is hugely important. And a mistake a lot of teams make with OKRs is they don't constantly review where they're doing, what they're actually doing. And then they get to the end of the quarter and they realize we've missed what we're trying to achieve. So always keep reviewing. That's another benefit. And lastly, I think another real key benefit for me is the bigger picture thinking. Okay, it makes strategy actionable. It makes it understood. Now, like I said earlier, you have top team who potentially will say it's actionable and understood. But if you go to the shop floor, for example, and you ask the question, do you understand the strategy of the organization? I almost guarantee that they probably won't, unless you are a very small business. So for me, it's very much about being very clear and being very aligned on empowering those teams to understand and connect to the bigger picture of the organization. So really, that's for me, focus on what matters, move the needle and bigger picture. And they are really, for me, the main sort of areas to focus on. Okay, other quick benefits as well, clarify priorities. Okay, so we need to think about what is a priority, what isn't. Remember the outcome we mentioned. Communication, hugely important. You've got to be able to not only align the teams, but you've also got to be able to communicate the clear message across the teams. Also, on the top right-hand side, drive alignment. I've talked about that already quite a lot, but that's really important to think about. How do I actually connect? If I'm a lower manager, how do I connect to the top part of the business? How can what I do influence the top? We also have things like transparency. One of the things we want to do with OKRs is when we set these OKRs, we don't want to put them in a filing cabinet or a virtual filing cabinet on a computer or a shared drive and password protect it and everything else. We want to actually make that readily available for a whole organization to view. So we communicate, people understand why we're doing what we're doing, and it allows us to then build that sort of inclusive culture as we go forward. And then on the right-hand side, continuous improvement. I mentioned earlier, towards the end of the cycle, you're reflecting, what did we learn? What didn't we learn? What's mistakes? What can we do better going forward? What went well? These are all improvements we need to think about. We can bring that into further cycles as we go forward. And you aren't just coming in every day and doing your normal work. You actually are going to be able to learn as you go forward. Okay, so the first one, the first thing that's quite important is assessing the suitability of OKRs for your company. So first question I always ask teams is understanding the company's strategy. So do you have a strategy in place? Now, if you're a startup, a small startup, you still need a strategy. You still need to think about, where you're going to play in the market and how you're going to win in that market. But for larger organizations, it's really important to have a clear strategy in place. And do people actually understand the strategy? And when I say people understand it, I mean, at this stage, I'm talking about higher level management, senior execs, the board. Do they actually understand the company's strategy? We saw on that chart earlier, MIT chart, that 51% of top managers said they did, 49% said they didn't. When I go into organizations and I talk to these teams, one of the exercises I tend to do is I get them just to write out on Post-it notes, what is the company's strategy? And nearly 9 times out of 10, I generally find that the Post-it notes are different. They're pretty much different. Sometimes they're similar with words, but a lot of it is a different message. And the problem you've got is if you haven't got a clear strategy at the top, how do you expect the rest of the organization to actually understand where the organization is going? So you kind of, first things first, let's have a company strategy in place. Let's make sure we've got that. Also think about the resources you require in the organization. Now, OKRs are fairly light touch, and they should be light touch. There shouldn't be a red tape process. But you also need to think about, some of the pre-work you kind of need to do. You need to understand, have we got the right structure in place? Do we have the right people who could potentially help us with this process? We have to put training in place. We have to do things like this. So that's really the second part. And then lastly, for me, another thing we think about is assessing the company culture. So think about, what type of culture do you have in your organization? Do you have a collaboration culture? Do you have an open culture where suggestions are listened to and things like that? Do you have a learning culture? If you don't really have this, it will take longer for the OKRs to really work within the organization. So you kind of need to be quite transparent in how you kind of work, and you need to have that collaboration approach. And that becomes more of an open process where you can take ideas, you can take lots of different insights and things like that from different parts of the organization to then allow you to become better, which is ultimately what we're all trying to achieve. Okay, so some other things to think about when we're actually rolling out OKRs across an organization. So the first one I was thinking on the left-hand side is who's going to actually sponsor the OKR program within the business. Normally, if it's a mid-size organization, it's normally the CEO who would generally sponsor this. And what their job as a sponsor is really to become the mouthpiece almost of OKRs in the organization. They're the people who are going to be talking about OKRs, going to keep going back to OKRs and company messages and things like that. But then we say manage as well. So who's going to manage the OKR program? Now, individual managers will be managing their own OKRs, but who's going to oversee the whole process? Normally for that, we look at bringing someone called an OKR champion into the business. That normally can be an employee who volunteers to come forward and wants to be part of this. And that's always the best way to do it, is to get people to volunteer. And they're called an OKR champion. We also think about other things. We think about what level of the organization you're going to set OKRs. So are you just going to set them at the top of the organization? Are you going to put it one layer below, as an example, for functional? Or can we actually look at maybe sharing some of these OKRs between teams to increase collaboration? Some organizations do it down to individual level OKRs, where each individual person within a team has an OKR. I'm not a great fan of that. I prefer the team shared OKR approach and the wider company level approach, because I think individuality, when you do that, it drives silos. But, you know, it all depends on the organization. Other things we think about is sort of how many OKRs are we going to set in the organization? How are you going to score those OKRs? Really important again. What type of key results are you going to use? You know, there's different types of OKRs, key results you can use. And then we think about, you know, where we're going to publish those OKRs. Okay, how are you going to get people going to see what you're actually doing? So there's just some quick considerations we think about. And this slide is just similar to the previous slide I've shown you about the cycles, but with the green lines, as you can see on the horizontal line, that's really saying that we should be checking in on progress of our OKRs on weekly or bi-weekly check-ins, depending on your organization. And really that should be a light touch. You know, where are we on progress? What's going well? Have we got any blockers that we need to think about? And do we have any activities coming up which could impact what we're actually trying to achieve? It's important because you need to identify mid-quarter any blockers you've got, or every week, any blockers that you've currently got, because then you can escalate it and then they can then hopefully unblock the problem for you. Again, that facilitates that communication. So lots of different things here, overcoming challenges with OKRs. Okay, so there is lots of different things you can think about, you have to think about. So the first one is lack of buy-in. Okay, so you need to have, that's where the sponsor comes important. They need to be the person who's going to be driving this. But also, you also need to think about training as well. You know, you don't just roll out OKRs, think about how could you actually bring some training in to ensure that people really understand what OKRs are. There is a resistance to change sometimes in organizations. Again, that's more of a cultural aspect. So you need to consider that. So again, do some culture work around that. Think about what is the purpose, what is your values as an organization, what behaviors are important to the organization. And then that will allow you then to start breaking some of that down, which will allow you to move forward and hopefully roll something like OKRs out. The other one, setting unrealistic goals. You know, make sure that your goals that you have when you look at OKRs, make sure they are a stretch, because we want to think of OKRs as really the icing on top of the cake. You know, it's really going to push us towards our growth goals. But make sure they are still realistic. Okay, so for example, if I set an OKR, or I work for SpaceX and I set an OKR that I want to get to Mars by Christmas. Now, I personally, from what I've seen in SpaceX, that won't happen. You know, so that's unrealistic. But I could actually then break that down into some smaller stretch goals, which are going to allow us to get closer to that overall aim that we're just thinking about. So make sure your goals are a stretch, but not unrealistic. And then really, I think just very quickly on this, the two other parts you think about is, you know, infrequent reviews. I've just shown you on the previous slide, you know, make sure we have weekly or bi-weekly check-ins and a mid-quarter review. And the last one really is linking to performance management. You know, don't link OKRs into performance management. It doesn't work. It basically makes teams become even more siloed normally in how they actually work. So just bring in the OKR conversation into performance management, but don't link it to pay or anything like that. And there's lots of information on that online. And if you want any questions, if you have any questions around that, just reach out to me and I'll come back to you. So just a quick case study. So this is a manufacturing company which we worked with last year. So they had a complete goal misalignment in the organization. They had poor communication and coordination between departments. They really had no progress towards where they were trying to go, and they weren't tracking, apart from a very top level, of how they're actually performing in their business. So they were, like I said, a mid-sized organization in the manufacturing space. Obviously, as another thing is the manufacturing space in the UK coming out of COVID-19 had a lot of problems, and it still has a lot of problems now. But a lot of these businesses shut down for 6, 7, 8 months. So there was a big problem there, big black swan event, you could call it. So this is some of the problems they had. So the solution we came up with, so the first thing we did is we went in there, we understood their problem, we looked at their strategy, their organization, and we made sure there was alignment there. And then what they did, they implemented OKRs to align those goals across the departments. They set their objectives at a team level, and at a company level, instead of having lots and lots of objectives, they had one. They had one objective. And then below that, they had their team's objectives. But what we actually did, instead of having lots and lots of goals, they literally had one North Star, one focus of what they wanted to do moving forward. Each objective had between 1 and 3 key results to actually track what they were actually doing. And then they completed these cycles of reviews, weekly, bi-weekly. This company did it bi-weekly, but this is how they kind of did it. But they went from lots and lots of goals down to having a company-wide objective, become very easy to understand for the organization. So the result really from that was they achieved better communication and coordination across the organization. It improved their efficiency and reduced their inefficiencies. They allowed them to track progress as well. And it allowed them also to reflect on some understanding of that organization's strengths and weaknesses in a lot more agile way. They also allowed them to align their goals across the organization, so people understood this a bit more in the organization. And it improved the motivation and the buy-in from the teams, because they could see how their work at team level was impacting the wider organization and why it was important what they actually did. So again, this is just a very quick case study of how they actually did this. So just really on that is 3 reasons why OKRs tend to be really great for organizations and startups. Is the first one is alignment and focus. So again, think about how you can align, connecting to the wider strategy of the organization and how you can make progress. That brings me on to the second point, which is measurable progress. So it allows you to track results. It allows you to bring data-driven decisions. It allows you to make some adjustments as you go forward. And then lastly, for me, I think is another thing that's important, is really increases the motivation and success. Okay, at the start, if you don't position it right in the organization, some people could think, okay, it's another management tool. But over time, if you bring in the right cadence of reviews and also the right environment, it becomes a much more open and inclusive process, which allows teams to understand how they connect to the wider part of the organization. So I think, for me, that's kind of a high level overview of OKRs and why they're important. And for me, it's really, like I said, it's connecting the individuals on the floor, the shop floor, as you could say, to the wider why of the organization, the purpose of the organization, and really just allowing that chain to be connected between the two. Okay, so it's got one more interactive slide. So I'm just going to flick to that one. So the next question for people on the call is, are you guys using OKR software currently? I just want to see. Okay. So there's 1 and 2. Okay. Okay. A bit of a mixture. Okay. Any more? Okay. Okay. So, okay, we've only got a small number of people voting on it, but okay, there's a bit of a mixture there. Okay, so with that, that's my part done. Hopefully that was insightful around some of the key points. Obviously, we've just touched the surface there. There's lots of information we can put into that, and I'll hand you over to the guys now.
Thanks very much, Andrew. I'd be keen to talk in a bit more detail about the company, the manufacturing company you worked with, and how long it took them to get up to speed and to learn to sort of mature in their approaches to OKRs. Okay. We've been doing it now for just over a year, and I still find that in some of the teams, some of them can stand on their own. They can craft a really good objective. They know how to write good key results. They have the check-ins frequently. They update their progress in JOP. Yet others need a lot of support. So it feels like something that needs pretty consistent work from leadership to back it up.
Yeah, definitely. I think with the manufacturing example, it was probably by the second quarter they got into a better rhythm. So first quarter was very much about learning. It was completely new. And the second quarter, they really kind of started making lots of progress in the actual process of implementing OKRs. And now they're in their third quarter now, and they're doing pretty well. I had a review from last week, and everything was going really well with them. Awesome. So yeah, it's really just that it's that continuous learning we have to do within organizations.
Yeah, great. Gaurav, could I pass over to you?
Sure. And thanks, Andrew, for that lovely presentation. I think it was quite detailed and put in a lot of pointers out there for the audience to understand the space of OKRs and really answer the question, what the fuss is. It's all about OKRs, right? So hopefully the audience got some good pointers from that. Before I really get into JOP, I just wanted to understand, I have one question which I get a lot, is how is OKRs different than initiatives and and project management? Because a lot of times people kind of confuse that if we are taking certain initiatives which are helpful to grow the business and helpful to take the journey forward for the business, then why do we even need OKRs at the top? So do you want to differentiate that for the audience a bit before I go in?
Yeah, I can take that. Yeah, for me, OKRs are, to me, they're supposed to be more of a short-term focus. So things like project management, or maybe KPIs is a good example of that. Maybe in organizations, a lot of people have KPIs, and they tend to be longer term. So they tend to be, review this customer service process and maintain a percentage score over a long term. That's an example of a KPI. Where OKRs are, they're really, where do we want to focus in the short term? Now, short term for a corporate could be, for the overall company, could be 12 months, but it could also be a quarterly basis. What's really important? What's going to help us really push on for this quarter? Then we can then reassess for the next quarter and move forward. So it's really about that icing on top of the cake. It's a term we use in England quite a lot. It's really, it's the bit on top. What's going to allow us basically to push forward with our business and actually, break new ground instead of just checking, like in a project basis, that we have to deliver something by a certain date. Okay, well, what's actually going to allow us to actually push forward with this process? So that's how I see it. The difference between the two. OKRs are not a replacement for KPIs, as an example, in organizations. They're not. They're supplemented to it, and they're there to really push.
There is a question that's been raised. How do you link individual performance? How can you track if a resource is not a team player and is impacting negatively the progress of your OKRs? I think from our perspective, like Andrew suggested, we have company level sort of annual OKRs, and we cascade those down to quarterly OKRs for sometimes functional teams and sometimes cross-functional teams. Our preference is to have cross-functional teams to improve collaboration and innovation between the teams. We don't have individual objectives. Individuals have got like expectations, and we have like biannual personal development discussions, which are largely about development needs. I think it's to us, it's very obvious when someone is not contributing towards the team. We see the team as the fundamental unit of work, not the individual. And I agree with the view that, it's certainly a focus on individual objectives, or certainly OKRs, can then get very messy to handle. And cascading down to another level, it just sort of, like, as a multiplying effect that becomes pretty difficult to manage. So, we focus on making sure that people know what's expected of them as individuals by their team leaders. But on the important stuff, and like maybe only 20% of the team at any one time will be involved in an OKR team, will be a team member in an OKR. But if someone is not completing their actions, for example, on time, or not committed to the team, it's very obvious, that they're behind. So tracking of that, I think, is super important. I don't know if you have anything to add, Gaurav or Andrew.
No, I think that's answered pretty well. Andrew, please go on if there is anything to add from your end.
No, totally. I think I agree. I think, I bring generally the OKR conversation into performance reviews, really, or performance conversations. Really, how are you, when you coach your team member, it's really about asking the question, how do you think you're contributing towards the OKR for our team, as an example? And I think so that's how I do it. But another thing is, I think if you start bringing down to individual level, one of the problems you get is it just increases the complexity, and OKRs then become very heavy in the organization, very time consuming. And we don't really want that. The whole purpose is to be quite light touch. So, and team focused. So that's my take on it.
Super. So just before we go into any other questions, since the screen said introducing JOP. So the reason we are here for JOP is because we are a very passionate bunch of people trying to solve the adoption of OKRs. OKRs by itself sometimes can be time consuming, and also people have difficulty for them to adapt and kind of work with it. How do we make this whole process simple is something that we are solving for with JOP. And then combining that with the people engagement, people performance, business performance is something which we see can give a lot of value to businesses. And today we have more than 600 users using it across different companies, getting some great feedback, and trying to make it as easy as possible for people to work, get value, and really grow their businesses with JOP. Yeah. If you can go to the next screen, Andrew, please. This is what we call as a JOP of wheel, and I'll take a minute or two just to kind of give an audience a little understanding of what and how does JOP solve the problem that we are passionate about, about growth of businesses. And if you want to know more, please reach out to us. Happy to get on a call and give out a detailed demo of the product. We have people who are going to go do a discovery call, understand where you are in the business, and then work with consultants like Andrew to bring the value on the table before we jump into the whole product life cycle as well. So while the whole OKRs gives the direction to the company, and it kind of cascades the whole strategy to the team level for teams to co-collaborate and kind of move forward in one direction and not working as a silo. With JOP in place, you can also see that alignment very visually, and we have roll-ups for proper strategy execution to be taken care of with the OKR philosophy. While having that whole philosophy or OKR is great, but how do you execute it? How do you take it to the last mile and create a discipline, which I think Grant was also talking a little about from the leadership, but keeping it so simple that people want to do it and people see the value is something that we have done with our execution module and the whole strategic actions that people can create within KRs, within objectives, for them to see how the momentum is going within their teams or business. We still want to keep people at the center of the stage. I think without the buy-in from people and without the people effort, nothing moves forward, no matter what technology you bring on the table. So that's the whole feedback which we've kept very continuous. It is not a laggard way of performance review, which just happens once a quarter, once in 6 months, but it's really touch points, which is consistent with your OKR execution journey, so that people can get the feedback when they need the most, and they can make small changes for them to get close to their objectives and key results. All of this creates a lot of data. So we've made it extremely simple a job to slice, dice, and make sense of that data, so that leaders, managers, individuals can really take their business decisions with keeping that data in front. So that's the whole insight that we bring. And there is a lot more that we are adding with nudges, with templates, for making this journey more intelligent and making the product more intelligent for them to help the businesses through this journey. So that's what JOP and JOP Wheel is. As I said, happy to go into details, and please reach out to us if that is required. I think there was another question which had come. How much extra effort or time should be placed or planned to initiate the OKR initiative? Any thoughts on that, Andrew and Grant?
Yeah, so sort of the time we should allocate basically before we actually start the initiative. Was that the question?
Yeah, so how much more time should be allocated? Let's say there is business as usual already happening at every business, right? And they are already working and spending time on that. So if they want to implement OKR over business as usual, what is the time allocation that the team's leadership should do for that?
Yeah, I mean, it's two parts to that really. So there's the part before you actually start rolling OKRs out. So that's really where we start thinking about, the purpose of why you want to do OKRs, and also the training element within organizations. So you're probably talking around, for training, you're probably looking at a day's workshop, I would think. And then, so that's usually about a month before we actually start implementing OKRs, maybe a month and a half before. But then actually, when you're actually running the process internally, really your reviews should only be, depending on the size of the organization, it should really only be, very short meetings. You're talking probably tag it onto another meeting. It's always quite good to do that. If you have a team meeting, put it on the end of that instead of actually having another meeting. So for me, you can probably do the check-ins, depending on the size of the organization, within, 5 minutes per team. And if you use something like the system that we just discussed here, you have all that information anyway. It's all on the screen, and it's really just a check-in between individuals. So I would say every 2 weeks or every week, as a team, 5 minutes each across the business. And then what you'll find is then you have the midterm review, and that should really be about an hour. And then, that's about it really. And then obviously towards the end, you've got resetting what you're doing. So yeah, I would say it's very light touch. So don't have meeting after meeting for the sake of it. Just have it very quick, very agile.
Great. Any points from you, Grant, on this?
No, I think Andrew's answered that pretty comprehensively. Yeah.
Great. So we're just about time. Any last things you want to talk to the audience about? Any last tips? Anything that you want them to take away? Before we log off.
I think for me, I think the biggest tip I would say is make sure that you understand the difference between an OKR and a KPI. I think that's a big one for me. KPIs they should still be in a business generally, because they manage a different thing. OKRs are very much about pushing the business forward. It's very much about driving growth or change in an organization. So it's not so much about monitoring. It's more about getting you across to a next stage in your development as a business. So for me, I think that's the important element, I would say.
I think my final point would be the thing that I most appreciate about OKRs is that it treats people in the business as adults. Mm-hmm. There's an expectation if you're in an OKR team, you're taking ownership for that objective. You might own a key result. So at minimum, you're contributing to the achievement of that key result. If you're short of resources, you ask people for help, you get more help. So it's really about empowerment of people and about creating more challenging and meaningful work. So I think it's a great way of attracting talent.
Yeah, my last thing would be that, focus on creating high-performing teams. Individuals are great when they're high-performing, but it's the team that win the games, teams that win the business. And OKR is a great way to put that team culture in place, where people align, collaborate, and work towards the success of the business rather than really showing that they are the stars. And I think that's a super intuitive way for you to have success in your business. So with that, let's keep this going, Andrew. We'll maybe meet again and get into more details of something which we may not have covered today. But thanks to the audience. Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Andrew, Grant, for putting this together. Nishita, thank you so much for being here and helping us for putting this together. And yeah, good evening, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.